It's funny how when we talk about medical diagnoses, there is this expectation of like total clinical precision.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like engineering, right?
Yeah, exactly. You fall off your bike, you break your arm, and the doctor just points to that jagged white line on the x-ray screen. They literally just point a pen at it and say, there it is. There is the problem.
And it provides this really comforting sense of certainty. I mean, we are wired to love things that can just be made visible and neatly categorized. The bone is either fractured or it's intact.
Right, it's binary. But the moment you step out of that hospital and into, well, the world of human identity or lived philosophy, that whole x-ray machine just shatters.
It really does. You're
Yeah.
suddenly looking at this landscape of the self that defies the very concept of a clean snapshot.
Exactly. And, if you are that insanely curious learner who wants to map the unmappable parts of the human experience without drowning in academic jargon, you are definitely holding the right map today for this deep dive.
We have some incredibly fascinating material today. It's a stack of texts that, at first glance, look like they belong in totally different sections of a library.
Oh, for sure. Tell us a bit about what we're looking at.
So we are pulling heavily from a highly structured, almost intimidatingly dense philosophical treatise called Formed Resonance.
Which is heavy stuff, but so rewarding. And sitting right on top of that, we have excerpts from something called the Lexicon of the Elven Spirit.
Right, which is this beautiful, sprawling collection of constructed mythological terms. And we're also throwing in texts on acoustic mathematics and psychology.
It sounds chaotic, but our mission today is actually really focused. We are going to figure out how we navigate our chaotic lives by looking at individual identity and spiritual growth through, honestly, the ultimate metaphor music.
It is a phenomenal framework. I mean, when you take the abstract dread of finding yourself and you anchor it in the physics of sound, it makes this profound, almost startling kind of sense.
Yeah, it really does. So we're going to unpack the harmonic return of modes, explore how shifting our internal modal centers literally constructs who we are, and then climb up into the mathematical mysticism of the 108 states of being.
It's a journey, for sure.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the whole symphony, we have to isolate the smallest possible unit first, right?
Exactly. The source text sets this really vivid, almost cinematic scene to explain this.
I love this part.
Right. Picture a musician sitting in a perfectly dark room, like an hour before dawn. Total silence. There's just a keyboard reflecting a tiny band of moonlight.
And they reach out and strike a single white key, just middle C.
Yes. And the acoustic frequency of that note is exactly 261.63 hertz. That is the physics of it. A hammer strikes a string, and it vibrates the air exactly 261.63 times per second.
Just one note hanging there in the air.
And the text points out the philosophical weight of that solitary note. Alone in that dark room, that C has no argument. It has no companion.
It doesn't mean anything yet.
Right. It just is. It exists in a state of pure, isolated potential. But the absolute second the musician's fingers fall on a second key, and then a third key relation begins.
Because now that C isn't just a sound in a vacuum anymore. It actually has context.
Exactly that. The frequency of the C, that 261.63 hertz, remains completely unchanged. The physics do not alter, but its function changes entirely depending on the acoustic company it keeps.
Wow. Okay, so break that down a bit more.
Well, if the musician plays that C alongside an E and a G, you have a C major chord. The mathematics of those sound waves align perfectly. Our brain interprets it as stable, happy, and resolved. In that context, the C is the root of a joyful home.
But if they keep holding that exact same C and instead play a B and an F sharp,
Everything shatters. You now have a major seventh and an augmented fourth clashing against that C. The sound waves are completely out of sync.
they're literally crashing into each other, right?
Yeah, it creates this physical phenomenon in the air called acoustic beats. It's a wavering clash of pressure that your ear physically struggles to process. Suddenly, that exact same C feels incredibly tense and dissonant.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because its identity doesn't vanish. Its identity deepens through its relation to the other notes. And this maps flawlessly onto individual human identity.
It really does. I mean, think about how this operates in your own life.
Right, like you are the C. The frequency of your core self is vibrating at its own rate. But your function changes depending on the chord you are currently sitting in.
Exactly. You walk into your childhood home for Thanksgiving, and you are immediately slotted into a chord where your function is like child seeking approval.
Or rebellious sibling. And then you walk into the office on Monday morning, Your core frequency hasn't changed over the weekend, but now you're in a chord where your function is leader or colleague.
You go out for dinner with your best friend and you become a confidant.
But wait, let me push back gently on this. If my function is constantly shifting based on the room, if I am this specific person for my boss, a totally different one for my spouse, doesn't that just make me a chameleon?
That is the ultimate existential anxiety, isn't it?
Yeah. Like, where is the actual me in all of that? Am I just a formless, fake self molding to whatever chord I'm dropped into?
The text absolutely anticipates this danger. If you are entirely defined by the notes around you, you aren't a self, you're just an echo.
Right. So how do we avoid that?
This is where the authors introduce the concept of a mature identity. They argue that a healthy identity requires two distinct architectural features at the same time, a boundary and a bridge.
Oh, like a cell membrane.
Yeah.
If you look at biology, a living cell only survives because of its membrane. It's a strict boundary that keeps the internal organs intact.
Yes, exactly. It stops the cell from just dissolving into the fluid around it.
But that membrane is also semi-permeable, right?
Yeah.
It acts as a bridge, allowing nutrients in. If it's only a boundary, the cell starves. If it's only a bridge, it dissolves.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. In psychological terms, the boundary preserves your consent, your conscience, and your capacity to refuse.
It keeps the C sounding like a C.
Right. Instead of being completely drowned out, it is your ability to say, no, this chord is demanding a function from me that violates my core frequency.
But the bridge permits trust and love. So a flexible identity isn't a fake, formless self. It is a self with enough of a sturdy membrane to enter deeply into a relationship without collapsing into it.
The text uses a wonderful phrase here. It says, the self is not a monarch dictating every action from a singular throne. It is an ensemble operating under a constitution.
I love that, because we all have conflicting desires within us, different memories, different loyalties.
Exactly. And psychological maturity doesn't mean forcing all those internal voices to sing in unison. That's tyranny. Maturity means having an internal constitution robust enough to hear the conflict without just surrendering to whichever impulse is screaming the loudest.
So what happens when that constitution fails? Like going back to the music, what happens when one of those roles we play decides it wants to be the only role?
That introduces what the author calls the danger of the center. When one function consumes all the rest, you get a severe distortion of identity.
Like the worker whose usefulness to their employer becomes their entire identity.
Yes, they place that function at the absolute dead center of their being. Because of that, they can no longer receive care, they can't enjoy leisure.
They can't even sit with a friend without turning it into a networking opportunity, right? Their worker note has grown so loud it deafened them to the rest of their own chord.
And when a center begins to feed upon the surrounding field like that, it ceases to be an identity and becomes an extraction machine.
It's like a medieval king who forgets he needs farmers to grow food and just taxes everyone to starvation to build giant statues of himself.
Which leads to the diagnostic tool the text provides. The moral test of any center is a single piercing question: what becomes more alive around it?
Wow. What becomes more alive around it? That is a devastating metric.
It really is, because if your identity as a driven professional is making your marriage wither or your health wither, it is a counterfeit center.
It's just extracting life force for solo performance. So if we realize our identity is shaped by what we place at the center of our attention shifting, that center completely changes the key or the mode we are living in.
Exactly. And this opens the door to the modal journey. The sources map this out using a conceptual diagram they call the music theory tree.
Let's get into this, because this blew my mind.
So it operates on a mathematically fascinating premise. Take the white keys on a piano, just the white keys, from C to the next C an octave up, no sharps, no flats.
That creates your standard major scale, or the Ionian mode.
Right. And our ears are heavily conditioned to this mode. Pop music, national anthems. It sounds bright, settled, and optimistic.
It sounds like waking up in a house you've lived in for 20 years.
But the magic happens when you apply a constraint. What happens if you use those exact same 7 pitch classes, just the white keys, but you start and end on D instead?
You haven't added any new musical information at all.
No, but because you changed the starting point, the center of gravity, the relationships between all the notes completely change.
The half steps fall in totally different places now.
Exactly. You've reorganized the architecture of the sound without changing the materials. You've created a new diatonic world. And the authors do something brilliant here. They organize these 7 modes as deep ethical disciplines.
Yes, they map them out as tasks of human attention. A seven-stage journey of the soul. Let's walk through these because treating acoustic modes as ethical states is so unique.
Let's do it. We start where we usually begin our lives, Ionian, the sequence from C to C. The text calls this the ground.
And ethically, they associate this with established order and gratitude, right?
Yes, because Ionian represents the recognition that every human existence begins in receipt. Before you achieved anything, you were nourished by someone else.
You were handed the architecture of language by your ancestors.
Exactly. Ionian is the psychological discipline of acknowledging the solid ground you stand on and the invisible support network beneath you.
But, you can't stay in the cradle forever. You can't just be grateful and never act.
Yeah.
You eventually have to step out and face the world, which shifts our center of gravity up one step to D. We enter the Dorian mode.
Dorian is fascinating. It starts on D and ends on D. This creates a scale with a minor third, giving it a very somber, serious tone.
Right. Our brains process a minor third as melancholy.
But Dorian also features a major sixth, which lifts the energy right before the end. It prevents the sound from collapsing into total despair.
The text titles Dorian as Courage Under Measure. Facing darkness without making darkness the final measure of reality.
It is the discipline of steadfastness. Think of the pediatric oncology nurse who shows up every day. They aren't in bright, happy Ionian. They are operating deeply in Dorian.
They hold the minor third of suffering, but also the major sixth of hope. And inevitably, that leads you to a critical decision, shifting us to E, the Phrygian mode.
Phrygian sounds instantly tense, almost Middle Eastern or Spanish.
That tension comes from the very first step, doesn't it? Moving from E to F is a half step immediately.
Yes, and a half step is the smallest interval in Western music. When you play an E and an F together, the sound waves violently clash. They rub against each other.
It feels exactly like being pressed up against a wall.
Which is why the text names Phrygian the wisdom of the threshold. It's the discipline of the pause.
Right before you cross a massive boundary, like signing divorce papers or clicking send on a career-changing email.
Exactly. Phrygian is the requirement to stop and feel the tension of that threshold, ensuring consent and guaranteeing you have an exit path before committing.
We live in a culture that hates Phrygian. We love to move fast and break things. But Phrygian says, feel the friction of the gate. Do not rush the half step.
Very well said. And once you pass through, the center shifts to F, the Lydian mode.
This is my favorite acoustic space. It's so floaty and cinematic, like a Spielberg movie score. It points upward.
The acoustic signature of Lydian is the raised fourth. Counting up from F, you hit a B natural instead of a B flat. This creates a tritone.
Which is mathematically unstable, right?
Completely. It divides the octave in half, creating a symmetry that feels like it has no gravity. It suspends you in mid-air.
And the text calls Lydian wonder under correction. That raised fourth opens up a space of absolute awe, like a scientist seeing something impossible through a microscope.
But the under correction part is vital. Wonder without reality is just magical thinking. Lydian requires you to discipline that awe with evidence. You explore the luminous instability, but you don't lose your mind to it.
Wonder under correction. I really need that framed on my wall. But eventually that wonder solidifies into expertise and you shift to G Mixolydian.
Mixolydian is built like a major scale, but it has a lowered seventh note. In a standard major scale, the seventh acts as a leading tone, pulling your ear forcefully to a resolution.
It demands closure. But Mixolydian removes that leading tone, so the intense pull is just gone. The scale breathes.
Which perfectly maps to its ethical title, Restrained Authority. It represents power that leaves the seventh open.
Like a mentor setting up parameters but letting the team figure out the final steps. Authority that coordinates but makes space for improvisation.
Exactly. But that relinquishing of control inevitably brings us to the reality of loss, which shifts us to A, the Aeolian mode.
The natural minor scale, the universal language of sadness.
Aeolian is the mode of grief and release. Because it lowers the third, sixth, and seventh degrees, it naturally carries lament.
But the text's insight here is so restorative. We usually treat grief like a malfunction we need to cure, but the text argues grief is just the truth about value, spoken in the absence of the object.
Precisely. We mourn because something mattered. The discipline of Aeolian isn't about getting over it. It's about letting memory have its place without letting the absence govern every single room in your life.
And finally, we hit the strangest mode. We shift to B, the Locrian mode. Honestly, almost no music uses Locrian because it sounds fundamentally broken.
It sounds broken because it's built on a diminished fifth. In other modes, the distance between the first and fifth note is the acoustic bedrock. But in Locrian, that pillar collapses.
The root and the fifth actively clash. It's total instability. The text calls it dependency and ruin.
It represents catastrophic moments, a sudden medical diagnosis, a natural disaster wiping out your town. It destabilizes the concept of home.
You don't seek Locrian out. It happens to you.
Right. And the discipline there is facing the truth of our fragility, realizing how deeply dependent we are on forces outside our control.
Okay, I have to interject here. Because mapping this from gratitude to courage all the way to ruin makes sense in theory, but practically, how do we avoid getting trapped? Like, if my company goes bankrupt, I could easily get stuck in Locrian and become permanently cynical. How do we keep moving?
That is the pivotal question of the whole framework, and it's where the text introduces epistemic agility, or what musicians call modulation. Wisdom isn't mastering one mode and staying there. It's the ability to actively modulate between them.
You literally have to physically move the center.
Yes. If you are stuck in Aeolian grief, you don't pretend the minor notes aren't there. You deliberately shift your attention to the Ionian ground of things you are still grateful for, or reach for Lydian wonder. You modulate to hear the full spectrum again.
It's like you're just slamming the same chord for 80 years if you don't. But forcing yourself to modulate that creates immense friction. It hurts.
It absolutely does.
And that transitions us to the Elven glossary, because they have a specific word for this friction. Axial. Thriving because of contradictions, not in spite of them.
We usually view tension as a failure of the system, but Axethel suggests tension is a generative, necessary force, like a violin string. If it's completely loose, it's peaceful, but it's silent.
It has to be stretched tight to resonate. And the sources bring in a real-world musical reference here, Alexander Scriabin's mystic chord.
Oh, Scriabin is fascinating.
I was listening to it earlier today. It's this wild hexachord, C, F sharp, B flat, E, A, and D. It never resolves. It just hangs in the air, shimmering.
Scriabin believed this chord represented the fundamental harmony of the universe. Reality isn't meant to resolve into a perfectly comfortable static state.
We keep waiting for the final chord so we can relax, but the universe is playing the mystic chord.
Exactly. Truth is this complex, abrasive chord where dissonant intervals actually compose growth. The friction isn't masking the music. The friction is the music.
Let me bring up an analogy from the text that totally rewired how I think about this tension. The rocket analogy.
Oh, that's a brilliant one.
Right. Think about an explosion.
Right.
It's just massive chaotic energy expanding everywhere, fire and noise. But a rocket takes that exact same explosive fire and applies a rigid constraint, a combustion chamber and a nozzle. Because it's constrained, it becomes thrust. The constraint makes flight possible. But my question is, how do I know if the constraints in my own life are a nozzle helping me fly or just a prison holding me back?
The author provides a great diagnostic tool for that. They break constraints into 3 distinct categories: enabling constraints, dead constraints, and extractive constraints.
Walk us through those. What's an enabling constraint?
It's the nozzle of the rocket, a limitation that paradoxically creates capacity. Think about the grammar of a language. It severely limits the sounds you can make, but by submitting to it, you gain the capacity to communicate complex thoughts.
Or a marriage vow. It's a massive constraint on your future options, but it enables deep, long-term trust.
Exactly. Then you have dead constraints. These are rules or habits that survive long after their useful purpose vanished, like a corporate bureaucracy requiring a form no one reads anymore.
Or a defensive emotional wall you built as a kid to survive a chaotic home. But now as an adult in a safe place, it's just getting in the way.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
That wall needs to be dismantled now. And the third is the extractive constraint. This one is dangerous because it looks like an enabling constraint.
How so?
Well, it creates order, but it's designed to transfer the benefit away from the person being constrained and toward the person applying the constraint.
It's exploitation dressed up as discipline.
Yes. Like a cult leader imposing strict rules. The thrust generated by that constraint goes entirely to feeding the leader's power. An extractive constraint demands your fuel but gives the flight to someone else.
Wow. We have to constantly audit the systems we belong to, asking if a rule is giving us capacity, if it's a ghost from the past, or if it's feeding off us.
And we also have to diagnose the internal dissonance we feel when we bump up against these constraints. The text categorizes 4 types of dissonance.
Let's hear them.
First is corrective dissonance. You feel this when something is objectively wrong. You violated your own morals or your belief contradicts obvious evidence.
Your internal guitar string is literally out of tune.
Right. The only resolution is honesty and revision. You admit the error and tune the string. Then there's developmental dissonance. This happens when a new capacity outgrows an old form.
Like a teenager arguing with their parents. It looks like misbehavior, but it's actually their mind gaining the capacity for independent thought.
Exactly. It's growing pains, not an error. The third type is tragic dissonance. This one is incredibly painful. It occurs when two genuine competing goods come into direct conflict.
Like a doctor with only one ventilator and two dying patients. Both deserve to live, but saving one means losing the other.
Or taking a massive career leap that means uprooting your kids from a school where they're thriving. There is no clean victory.
Naming it tragic dissonance gives it such dignity. It stops you from looking for a cheap life hack. The only response is compassion and taking absolute responsibility for the choice.
And finally, we have manufactured dissonance. This is entirely artificial. Tension created deliberately by an outside force for its own advantage.
Like a social media algorithm injecting outrage into your feed because angry neurological arousal keeps you scrolling, which serves their ad revenue.
Or a manipulative manager pitting employees against each other. It doesn't need to be integrated philosophically. It's poison. It requires strict boundaries and an exit strategy.
Okay, let's zoom out. We have the solitary note, finding identity in a chord. We modulate through the 7 modes. We audit our constraints. We diagnose our dissonances. It's an incredible amount of motion.
Yes, a vast departure from the starting point.
But movement toward what? This entire framework is titled Formed Resonance, the philosophy of harmonic return. All this exploration has to lead somewhere.
It leads to the return. And this is the ethical summit of the worldview. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we started our scale in Ionian, rooted on C. We went out into the wilderness of sound. But eventually a piece of music must resolve.
We return to the Ionian ground, to the note C. But the text hammers this point home. It is emphatically not the same C.
Right. Visually, it's the exact same piece of ivory on the piano. The frequency might be 261.63 hertz again, but contextually it does not mean the same thing.
Because it resonates with the acoustic memory of all the intervening notes. You return home, but home's different because you were different.
There's that great quote from the text, "The highest ascent is return. It is the ethical law of return."
It completely upends how we usually view spiritual growth. Like we think growth is climbing up to a pristine peak to escape the messy world.
But this philosophy argues that any insight gained on the mountain is totally useless, unformed, until you bring it back down into the valley.
Right. If you meditate in a cave for 3 years and find total inner peace, but come back down and you're still a jerk to the barista, your enlightenment is fake. The ascent has to return as service.
Exactly. It has to translate into repairing injury, doing the dishes, and paying attention to your kids.
There are 2 narrative examples in the text that perfectly contrast this. First, we have Jack, who survives this massive magical storm.
Yes, and the mechanism of his survival is choosing to return to his roots. The humble cottage of Mrs. Crandall. He chooses ordinary human forgiveness over magical resentment.
He shattered the enchantment and returned steady and renewed. He metabolized the dissonance and used it to become grounded. A true harmonic return.
But then contrast him with the dragon, Tihom. She is the ultimate cautionary tale.
Oh, absolutely. She's this immensely powerful dragon held captive behind a dam for centuries. And when she's finally released, it's a corrupted return.
Because during all those centuries, she didn't process anything. She didn't modulate. She just meticulously cataloged every humiliation. Her memory became a ledger of wrongs.
So when she breaks free, it's not a harmonic return bringing wisdom back. It's a blind explosion of apocalyptic vengeance, a sinister ecstasy.
A return fueled entirely by revenge is just a traumatic repetition. You haven't transcended the prison, you've just become the warden.
That's a chilling way to put it. To ensure our own ascents don't curdle into corrupted returns, the text places a rigorous demand on us when we reach the summit of certainty.
Yes, the observatory in the blank book.
Right, at the absolute peak of your success, you expect a throne. But instead, there's just an observatory pointing to unexplored stars and a blank book reminding you of what you don't know.
And standing there, before you begin your descent, the text demands you answer 4 ego-destroying questions. The first is, what would change my mind?
That is brutal. If you are holding a belief and can't imagine a single piece of hypothetical evidence that would make you change your mind, you aren't seeking truth. You're just defending a fortress.
The second question, who can challenge me? If you've insulated yourself with sycophants whose paychecks depend on agreeing with you, you've built a counterfeit center.
You're completely shielded from corrective dissonance. The third question is, what injury requires me to stop?
That's the failsafe. You have this grand vision, but at what point does the collateral damage outweigh the beauty of the blueprint? If you don't know, you're dangerous.
And the fourth question, which brings it all back down to earth.
Yeah.
What ordinary duty must this insight help me fulfill?
If your massive breakthrough doesn't make you a slightly more patient parent or a more attentive friend, what was the point?
These questions protect the truth and the vulnerable.
Hmm.
So what does this all mean? If we return to see change by the journey, we aren't moving in a flat circle. We're actually moving in a three-dimensional spiral.
Which brings us to the final, most mind-bending section, the concept of recursion and the 108 states of being. The Elven glossary calls this spiral movement chronomnesis.
Chronomnesis, the spiral of emergence.
Right. Life isn't a straight line, and it's not a hamster wheel. It's a spiral staircase. You revisit the same themes, the same griefs, the same relationship dynamics, but each time you are at a higher or deeper octave.
You cover familiar ground with new memory? The universe creates itself by returning to itself with a difference.
Exactly.
Now, I have to be honest, when I read this section detailing the 108 states of being, my inner skeptic totally flared up. Yeah. I looked at this numerology and thought, wait, is this just poetic pareidolia? Are we just seeing faces in the clouds because we desperately want pattern and meaning? Is this just mystical fluff?
That is such a vital pushback, and what's amazing is that the text anticipates that exact skepticism. In the modular mind section, the authors explicitly warn against cognitive bias.
Right, they talk about how we are hyperactive, pattern-seeking machines.
Exactly. They draw a hard line between poetic resonance and physical fact. They tell us not to confuse our intricate maps with the actual territory.
But they still lean heavily into the number 108. Why that specific number?
Because it elegantly encodes the recursive spiral. The 1 represents the origin, the starting point. The 0 represents the void, the empty space mathematically required for structure. And the 8 is the symbol of infinity, the recursive flow.
108. Origin, void, infinite flow. It's like binary code for the soul's journey.
Furthermore, 108 is built on nested mathematical ratios. It's 12 times 9, the 12 signs of the zodiac multiplied by the 9 realms of existence, or 27 times 4.
The math represents the fractal nature of reality. The rhythm of a heartbeat mirroring the tides, mirroring planetary orbits.
Yes, a vast clockwork of recursion. And this is practically linked to the 9 sacred stations of the soul's ascent.
Which include Taba, turning away from illusion, Wara, watchfulness over motives, Zood, releasing attachment to outcomes, Saber, unshakable patience, all the way to Marifa, the unveiled eye of pure wisdom.
But the crucial point, tying back to the spiral, is that you don't treat these stations like a checklist. You don't just muscle through Taba, hit Marifa, collect a certificate, and retire.
Right. The text uses the metaphor of a river carving a canyon over millennia. You revisit these stations repeatedly. You might achieve incredible patience in your career in your 30s, but a decade later, a health crisis hits.
And suddenly that career patience is useless in this new domain. You're thrown all the way back to the first station, needing to turn away from a totally new bitterness.
You spiral through the stations, constantly returning to the start, but constantly carving the canyon deeper. And all this culminates in this paradoxical elven word, umialase.
Umialasi. It's so difficult to translate because it defies Western logic.
Existing is non-existence, yet illuminating.
As you travel this spiral, you slowly shed all false identifications. You realize you are not your job title, you are not your grief, you're not even the roles you play for your family.
You negate the false self, layer by layer. It sounds terrifying, like disappearing into the void. But paradoxically, what's left behind is pure consciousness.
By ceasing to demand that the world be about you, you connect harmoniously to the whole world. You stop being a wall blocking the light, and you become a clear lens focusing it.
You can truly see the other notes in the chord because you aren't shouting your own name over them anymore. Wow. Okay, let's bring all this sprawling architecture together.
We covered an immense amount of territory today. We started in a dark room with a single note, learning that identity is entirely shaped by relation.
We explore the music theory tree, realizing we can modulate our reality through different modes, from Ionian gratitude to Locrian ruin.
We learn to embrace axathol, the generative tension, and audit our constraints and dissonances.
And we face the ethical imperative of the harmonic return. Every ascent must be brought back to the valley to serve the vulnerable.
Finally, we saw that this entire process is recursive. We ride a three-dimensional spiral, carving the canyon of the soul, aiming for that pure awareness of umialasi.
It really changes how you view your own life.
It does. And for you, the listener, as you process all this, you are not just a detached observer with a clipboard. You are a note in the chord. The world is a living symphony, and to be conducted by it means you must participate through fidelity, not force.
A living symphony. I want to leave you with one final thought, drawn from a tiny footnote in the text about acoustics. In music, a moment of total silence written on the staff is not just an empty
It's
space.
not a void to rush through.
Exactly, the rest belongs to the work. It shapes the rhythm, it provides the contrast that makes the melody intelligible. Without silence, the music is just a suffocating wall of noise. So before you embark on your next grand departure or attempt your next heroic harmonic return, take a moment to look at the blank spaces and the quiet pauses in your life right now. Ask yourself, what is the silence in your life currently trying to compose?